It is Friday, January 24th. Let's talk PlayStation. Starting off, as always, with our PlayStation Plus reminder. The January titles are Uncharted: The Nathan Drake Collection and Goat Simulator. Plenty of time to download these games or add them to your library. Real quick, minor news story, but YouTube TV available right now in the US. Keep in mind, PlayStation View, Sony's PlayStation TV streaming service, is closing in like a few days, January 30th. So it looks like Sony's finally opening up the floodgates a little bit, not blocking off other content providers. YouTube TV the first. I'm sure that will come to other territories, and then other TV network streaming services will come in as well. Now, I believe it was last week we talked about a patent that Sony filed for a microphone being built right into the controller, which you'd assume is for an AI talking back and forth with your PS5, for example. Well, there was another patent that same day that we actually missed. So real quick going over this one, it actually is describing what we already know about PS5's controller, which is the haptic feedback, the adaptive triggers, but this gives us an example, another example that we haven't heard of so far. So the patent is actually in Japanese, but it's been translated, and it loosely describes an example where, let's say you're climbing a ledge, and if you were to pull the trigger too hard, the rock, for example, that you're grabbing onto might give out and break. Whereas if you grab too lightly, you might not have a strong grip and your character would fall out. Now that sounds cool. Always a good reminder, though, that as unique as this feature sounds, that's the always rock in a hard place when it comes to this stuff, because it's there, but the developers have to make use of it. So much like the 6-axis in PlayStation 3 or the touchpad on PS4, and even more so PS5, when you have these highly unique features built in the SDK and built into the hardware, and a third party, for example, is developing games on all these platforms, they're not really going to go out of their way to make something really cool and that unique, which it doesn't easily translate to the other games. So it's cool to hear this stuff, but I feel like this is a lot of things that we might see in the first year of PS5, mostly from Sony's first party, and then we might see this stuff go away. And it seems early to even say that, but it seems that might probably happen. Now, moving on, one piece of news that's being reported this past week is that we might get another PlayStation VR this year in 2020. Some websites are calling this PlayStation VR 2 and jumping the gun a little bit. This is coming from an investor report from VR Education, and it states, 2020 will see Sony release the PS5 and a new version of the PSVR headset, which will further expand the high-end VR user base. The company intends to support this device with its current suite of showcase software. So it's really left up to interpretation. We're not going to get a PlayStation VR 2. Sony has said that much in regards to when they launch PlayStation 5 this holiday season. They've gone on record to say they don't want to overwhelm the market with two very expensive pieces of hardware. Just really wouldn't look right to release a PS5 at, say, $500, and then a very high-tech next-generation PlayStation VR that also needs its own slew of developer support. Not going to happen. It might come a year or 2 years into PS5, but at the very least, what this might be referencing is maybe an iteration of the current headset that we have right now. It is a 2016 headset, and even by those standards back then, it wasn't a super high premium virtual reality headset, and Sony does like to slim down their hardware. They love to repurpose it and make it more efficient, which they've only done once with PlayStation VR, and it was a very minor change where they allowed an HDR pass-through. So typically with the first-gen PSVR, you couldn't use HDR if it was connected to your PS4. The second-gen did that, and then it also had the headphones built in from a different location, or I guess they were just built right in. I don't have it, but it was a very minor revision. So this might be something a bit more dramatic, like maybe they make the first-generation headset wireless, or maybe they just slim it down a lot more, remove the amount of cords there, bundle it with a bunch of games, lower the price again, maybe something like that. Now, one thing that really got a lot of attention this past week was Godfall, which currently is the only real PS5 confirmed game that we have so far, where it's directly stated, hey, this game is coming for PlayStation 5. It's from Gearbox, a hack and slash looter, and I always want to say shooter, but it's a looter that's a hack and slash, right? And leaked footage came out, looked okay, but it's leaked footage, and then the full trailer came out, so people had some opinions about how it looked, and if it didn't look that great for PS5 hardware. The developer did step forward to say, hey, that leaked footage, it's a year old, it was on PC, it was just a vertical slice of the game that was used internally, it wasn't running on PlayStation 5 hardware, but we're very excited that people are pumped to see our game. And little side note here, but Sony has now updated their website for a full page of Godfall, just kind of, a very slight little marketing thing, but it's an actual web page built for the first PlayStation 5 game. So a very small thing, but this is Sony slowly acknowledging PS5 titles, and that's it. So if you saw the footage and you weren't that impressed or anything, well, it's not entirely accurate or fair to judge it. For our next news story, there's really not a whole lot we can draw from this, but I still found it pretty noteworthy. A former software engineer from Feist Electronics left on their LinkedIn profile something very revealing about the SSD tech that they worked on. More specifically, that they worked on the SSD tech provided to Microsoft for the Series X. So in his LinkedIn, it lists a bunch of the technology that he worked on, but on that second line there, DRAMless PCIe Gen 4x4 NVMe SSD installed in Xbox Scarlett by hosting Scrum, blah 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 blah. The rest of that, right? This basically says that at the very least, at the time of this what he wrote in his time at the company, the Series X is being powered by what appears to be industry standard PCIe 4.0 SSD read-write speed, and that's not bad, but it is a bit of a, I don't want to say far cry, but that's the thing, is that a lot of articles that are reporting on this, a lot of sites that are talking about this, are claiming that Series X is half the SSD speeds of PlayStation 5. But the problem is we don't know anything about the PS5 SSD speeds because Sony won't talk about it. It's one of the greater unknowns about PlayStation 5, and that's why a lot of rumors surrounding it is that Sony's going to be playing a marketing campaign largely to that you can start your games whenever, suspend, resume, no load times, this and that. And if you follow the Microsoft camp of rumors, that's not nearly as prevalent. I know people are excited about the SSDs across the board, but if you follow Xbox news as well, that rumor doesn't nearly come up as much. So it appears that Microsoft might be going with something that, again, not necessarily budget. This is still good, right? It's an industry standard. They're up there. It's going to be very fast for Series X. But it makes me feel as though Sony, the reason why they won't talk about it is because it is very proprietary, like they keep talking about. They won't talk about who's manufacturing it. They won't say if it is the PCIe 4.0 standard. Surely you would think it is, because they keep claiming that it's the fastest available SSD speeds on the market. Now that was quoted 5 months ago now, when Mark Cerny did that Wire.com article, so who knows if that still holds true. Probably not, but you never know. We don't know what they're really doing in terms of how proprietary this is, and this is why we're also talking about how when PS5 comes, I really want to know what they have in terms of expandable storage options, because there's really not much. That's probably going to be something that is within the Sony gates that they might have to sell to directly, because you aren't going to be able to use expandable storage, not traditionally. Any type of regular spinning HDD, then you're immediately losing the benefits of what we know about PS5, is that you will have quick access to your games, no load times. The second you install a game on that, it's just going to have to get copied back over, and you're sitting there waiting for something to take over with a huge loading bar, right? Which I don't think Sony would actually allow, because they don't want people to have that user experience if the marketing campaign plays into how fast PS5 is. So not even necessarily to talk about Series X, but rather it seems as though right now Sony is doing something a bit more in terms of what they want to put with the solid state drive. In the Microsoft camp, maybe it's not nearly as big of a deal, or Microsoft's not putting as much stock into that part of the box. Next up, developer HouseMark has made a very interesting blog post this past week detailing their future as a developer. Now, if you don't know HouseMark, very long history with PlayStation. They've done Super Stardust, Dead Nation, Alienation, Matterfall, Resogun launch title on PlayStation 4, right? They did a lot of twin-stick shooters, and then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, they announced that they're done with twin-stick shooters because it's just the sales aren't there anymore. They're not making enough money. So they've moved on to larger scale development, or genres that reach to a larger amount of people, right? Their next title was supposed to be Storm Divers, which was a battle royale game. So there you go. That tells you they're certainly trying to change their target audience. Well, they've announced that they've actually put that game on hold. So the blog post actually says, and I quote, "So now we are focused on delivering our most ambitious and biggest game to date, putting every other project on hold, including the development of Storm Divers." Goes on to say, "The time is drawing ever closer when our publishing partner will reveal what we are working on, with the launch coming after that." So this has immediately left a lot of people wondering, okay, what's going on here? Pretty dramatic shift, because that is the last update we really had from them, is that they were doing Storm Divers. And that was it, right? Now they're doing something on a much bigger scale. And HouseMark, great developer. They've done a lot of fantastic games, but they have not taken on such a larger project like this, which is not a bad thing. It can be done. But who's their publishing partner? And you kind of have to go off history. that is what they've done. They've worked with Sony for 5, 6, 7 some odd games for the last well over 10 years now. They have a very good rapport, very good relationship. So not only are a lot of people considering that maybe Sony is acquiring them, which I think might be a bit too far, but we'll get to that in a second because some people are thinking about that for a certain reason. But Sony could be the publishing partner here because there is that relationship. It's hard to ignore. Certainly you would think that Sony might be the one that stepped forward and funded this project because, well, they do have that history. So they made a vertical slice of this very large project and this large ambition, and Sony believed in it. I could absolutely see Sony footing the bill and paying for this game to be released on PlayStation 5, if that is what this is. So as I was just saying though, good segue to the next news story about Sony acquiring more developers. So this is kind of like a mishmash of like news. We've talked about it before, but like when we talk about sites like Reset Era or NeoGAF, and I've mentioned it on this show before, when it comes to the insider talk, who knows what, this sounds fake, there's another leak on 4chan, there's another pastebin post, all this. At the very least, whenever we talk about something from NeoGAF or from Reset Era, at the very least they have a vetted process. So you can't just go on there, spew a bunch of stuff and not have repercussions for it. Usually the mod team will step in and verify the sources to make sure that the person is legitimate and can actually have potential access to that kind of information. It's not great, but at the very least it's something. It's the next best thing, right, outside of completely random posts from everywhere else. One of the insiders that we've talked about once before, I believe Tommy Fisher, has been stating that Sony has acquired Remedy and that they haven't talked about it just yet. And they've also gone on to say that they acquired somebody in Finland. Now, to be honest, in Finland, that's Remedy and HouseMark. And then he followed up with another post maybe a few days ago stating that Sony has HouseMark and Remedy now and that they're part of Worldwide Studios. And also stating that Microsoft has acquired Techland. Techland, big video game developer and publisher, doing Dying Light 2, which recently got delayed. But these are all completely unconfirmed. So the crucial thing here is that Tommy Fisher could not be verified on NeoGAF. He went through the process. The mod team could not verify him. So take that for what it is. But also, like we mentioned with Remedy, Remedy's a publicly traded company, and there's still a very big gray area there in terms of how that needs to be handled if they were to join Sony. If they were to be acquired, there has to be a bit of a disclosure, but there's still a gray area in terms of how that could be approached or how Sony wants to do it if they want to try and be a little bit secretive about it. Not saying that Remedy's been acquired, but rather let's say they're planning on it and they're just waiting until the time is right to make that announcement. But there's nothing indicative of any of these things right now. But the HouseMark thing is pretty telling, and I can see where people are coming from. It wouldn't have been, to be honest, HouseMark is a developer that I would have put on the back burner. I would have said it like 5 years ago, yeah, they'd be probably a great studio to acquire because they probably wouldn't be nearly as much as some of these higher tier studios. So I think it would be a good get for smaller titles, and you could foster them with more employees, build a studio, slowly grow them into handling bigger projects. Maybe that's what's already happening, but I wouldn't have guessed that HouseMark would be acquired. But right now, where we stand on that stuff, not looking all that good. But still a good segue to the next news story. Somebody else on NeoGAF, Osiris Black, had made a very long-winded post detailing very clearly a trailer for a video game that they did not disclose, but many are thinking that it leads to a sequel to The Order 1886. And what's even more interesting is that somebody asked, will this be for PS5 or Series X? And he only responded with the word yes, leading some to believe that the game is now multi-platform. So here's what's going on here. First of all, The Order 1886, that IP belongs to Sony. So if that were to happen, right, if Ready at Dawn is working on another sequel to The Order, which a lot of people I think probably finally want now. The game came out during its time, $60. People moaned about it being a 5-hour game. Very pretty graphics game, but not a lot of gameplay, and those are all very valid concerns. But the second it's a $5 bargain bin title, now everybody wants a sequel to the game. Ready at Dawn left it on a cliffhanger. I'm sure they want to explore that world more, so maybe the game is going to get a sequel at some point. But somebody has to fund that game. It's very. I'm sure the budget for that game was quite high. But would Sony relinquish the rights to the Order IP if it were to be multi-platform? Plausible. It happens. It's not very common, but it happens. Like, for example, Remedy was a developer that just got back the IP to Alan Wake not that long ago. when Sony acquired Insomniac Games, they were able to confirm that they do have the Sunset Overdrive IP again. That was pulled away from Microsoft, so I guess that was more conditionary. The actual contract there was just the first game and not necessarily the property. But it does happen. It's not very often, though. Would Sony let go of the Order IP? I guess I could see it, but this is one where if this individual gets it right, boom, they were right on the money. But until then, anyone's guess is as good as mine. I don't think Sony would go for a second game and go through the process of actually funding that all over again. So yeah, it does appear to be, out of all of Sony's IP like that, it's one where it's like, okay, if they're gonna let go of something, that might work. Moving on, we have more game-related rumors, and this one goes into the next news story, so bear with me, but Aesthetic Gamer over on Twitter, who previously had inside information on Resident Evil 3's remake prior to it getting announced, had stated that he knows Konami is working on 2 new Silent Hill games, that they had approached developers of working on a soft reboot, so more of a full feature-length game, and then one of them being more smaller scale, you would assume, the same veins of a Telltale Until Dawn style game. Maybe it's episodic, but you have, you make your own choices, and it's a little bit more passive in how you play it. Doesn't know no context in terms of what developers have been approached, or what the plans really are. Maybe these might get announced next year, but not much else other than that. Now, the other news story is we have another Twitter user. This person apparently well known for having inside information in the entertainment sector, so things like comics and movies. This is a territory I'm not super into, right? So I can't really vet that. But they did claim that they don't normally post game news. However, they know that Sony's working on a new horror IP, and that's all they know, really. Now, for this particular rumor of Sony working on a new horror IP, I don't feel too strongly about that one way or the other. I think that's far-reaching, trying to connect the dots to something that maybe, in all likelihood, isn't there, because it's just way too early to talk. I know it's very easy to point towards the previous news story, but if we want to jump back to the previous news story, there's a bit more discussion going around in terms of the Silent Hill name, because now we're hearing from not just this user, but we also had a Reddit post, and I believe there was somewhere else that was referencing that we might see Silent Hill return again. So it seems very clear that word might be creeping out of Konami that they are exploring doing another Silent Hill, and it may be very, very early in the process. I know Kojima is another thing that kind of gets pulled in here about him working on a horror franchise again, or going back to Silent Hill. So it seems like whatever's going on here in the horror space, in the Silent Hill space, it's very early in the process, but I suspect that we'll be hearing more and more about these things as the project matures a little bit. But anyway, it's time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you could win a $10 PSN code. I'd like to congratulate this user right here. I will contact you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, I suggest you follow the link down below, because we do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. $10 every week. I'm trying to pay for your games. Supporting this channel in a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week. Those are some of the news stories that I want to talk about you all. On Monday, we had what appeared to be the PS5 Dev Kits UI leak online. Looks very genuine, so we go over that, and also some PS5 rumors and leaks that we're just trying to debunk and all that stuff. And then Wednesday, we did a full review and unboxing of the PS4 back button attachment, so that should be hitting most retail stores by now. I know UK, I think, has to wait till February, or maybe all of Europe. But if you want a full overview of that device, and if you think you would like it, questions answered, it's in that video. Now, this coming Tuesday's video, it was supposed to be the previous Tuesday's video, but now I can confidently say I have enough time to edit it, so I'll just tell you what it is. If you remember last year, I thought it was a dumb video, but apparently not, because it was really popular, got a lot of views. I tested some old PS3 games online and asked who's still playing and why. So I tested a bunch of games, saw if the lobbies were active. Video got a lot of views, so why not do it again, right? I feel like that would be silly if I didn't. But this time around, I tested a lot more games, some very interesting results. Not much of a why this time, though. I couldn't find many people that were actually willing to talk and answer questions, and I didn't really want to harass people, but good results. So that will be this coming Tuesday, PS3 Online in 2020. Who's still playing and why? So tune in for that. Otherwise, that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.